joining us today. My name is Akiva Weiss, and as you probably just heard, a little overly static, I'm the English Language Fellow at Untitled University in St. Petersburg. And today I'm here to talk to you about accounting for cultural diversity in materials development. Now before we begin, it may be helpful if everybody just introduces themselves. There's not so many of us. And just tell us briefly about your interest or experience in creating materials with inclusion or cultural diversity. So if you'd like to just say your name, or you don't have to if you don't want to, you can pass it on to the next person. But if you'd like to share with us, that would be great as well. Would anybody, how about this, would anybody like to share?
Yes.
Yes. Would anybody like to share? Please raise your hand. We'd all like to know your background or your interest. Nobody? Don't be shy. You saw I just stood up there on Facebook Live, so if I could do that to anyone. Would anybody like to share their interest?
Okay.
Yes, please.
I'm Alexander.
Hi.
I'm retired. And I'm here out of curiosity.
Okay.
So I don't need any special materials or special aims. Just come.
Great.
It's more of socialization.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Anybody else? The first person is always the most difficult. After that, it becomes easier. Would anybody else, please?
Yeah, my name is Savannah. I'm a teacher of English at school. And I'm interested in anything considering English language. It's a nice time for me to hear and to listen to you. And once in my life, I was a member of an exchange program in the USA, and I'm interested in this country also.
Great. What exchange program was it?
It was an exchange program of students at school.
Okay.
I don't remember.
Great.
Me too.
Great, thank you. Great, so we have both personal interest and professional interest as well. That's great that we have this mix. So, as we know, there's great diversity in Russia, both with indigenous populations and ethnicities. Here's just a map here that is not fully inclusive, but gives just a basic idea, of course, of so many different indigenous groups, and I could easily put up a similar map for ethnic groups across Russia. So there's a tremendous amount of diversity. And we even have the president of Russia who was quoted as saying, you know, there's great value in this palette of common culture, right? This is what makes up Russia, right? The disparate cultures, right? And their uniqueness. And this is no different in the United States. As you know, we have a tremendous amount of different ethnic groups, as well as Native American tribes, right? The problem is that many of the textbooks, and even just books for students, right, do not have inclusive content. So if you look at this statistic we have here in the United States, 93% of children's books in 2012 were stories about just Caucasian students, children who look like me, more or less, right? And only 1%, less than 1%, were about Native American, and 3% about African American within the United States. So we know from research that when children see themselves in the material, when they can identify with the content that they're learning, they become more interested, they become motivated. And this leads to, of course, educational achievement. When you're interested in playing the piano, you get better at playing the piano. When you're not interested in it, when your parents force you to play the piano, you just forget everything after a few years. So our goal is to increase these numbers from 1% and 3%, right? And have this diversity and inclusion in the classroom. So we're looking here at empowerment and achievement, right? We have this identity, empowerment, and motivation nexus, right? When you see yourself, you become empowered and motivated, right? It fosters confidence in the learners and leads to achievement. So this presentation has a few aims. We aim to pique the student interest, to get the students more interested in what they are learning. We want to promote achievement. We want to create culturally inclusive materials that will make students want to learn more, to see themselves. in the text. And we also want to counter any bias, any prejudice, right? Any stereotypes that are in the materials, right? Through an inclusive curriculum. We want to address this when the learners are younger or even teenagers, before they become fully fledged adults and these stereotypes coalesce. And of course we want to provide some sort of intercultural forum, and in this case between Russia and the United States. So here are a few examples of some problems before we talk about solutions. These are taken from textbooks from the United States, England, from India, from Thailand. Here, they talk about conservative people who have a basically pessimistic view of human nature, right? So people who are conservative in this book, right, they have a pessimistic view of human nature and, right, they're corrupt, self-centered, and lazy. Students read this and they internalize these stereotypes, right? Racial ones that talk about what is beautiful and what is ugly, right? This is very explicit, but as we'll talk about shortly, sometimes these are very implicit, how they work, right? Just showing a certain ethnic group in a positive light, and then when there's a negative example, it will be from another ethnic group. It doesn't have to spell it out. Children internalize this and they see the examples, right? Gender. Right? Boys are doctors, girls are nurses. This is a bit older. We don't see this very often. But again, we do see these gender roles imposed from an early age in many textbooks where women are doing particular jobs, men are doing particular jobs, and it won't spell it out like this. But the kids realize when they see this over and over. With indigenous groups, right? The author of this textbook meant well, right, and was trying to show how the structure, this Native American structure is, but they put casino there, a stereotype that Native Americans always have casinos on their lands. These are things we want to get away from. Right? And here in this last example, this says, anorexia, an eating disorder, seldom occurs among North American black women. Right? So we want to get away from these type of materials, and not only do we want to get away from these materials, we want to create materials that do promote inclusion and diversity. So there are a few do's and don'ts. There's actually a do here, by the way, but perhaps it was too light. I don't want you to think this is only about don'ts. There are a few things we want to do. When we're creating materials, we want to encourage sharing. We want to encourage sharing of stories. So if you have students who are specific ethnic groups or indigenous groups, we want to collect stories from them, put their stories firsthand into the material. Right? We don't want the material to be only from the dominant group's perspective, even if it is very well-meaning. We want a multiplicity of perspectives. We want to encourage research. We want to create task-based exercises in which the students have to seek out the roles of different groups, of different genders, of different races. Right? So we don't just want multiple choice A, B, C, D, or short answer, right, that tests grammar or comprehension. We want them to take a proactive role and research different groups that are different than theirs. And this allows us to celebrate the uniqueness of our learners, to highlight the uniqueness of them, but also to bring together the similarities. Because in the end, no matter how many differences we have a lot more similarities. So if we're able to highlight the unique aspects in a way that also brings together the similarities, this is exactly what we want to do. And I'm going to show you some examples of that. So we have several books here, right? I don't want it to think it's all pessimistic. There are a lot of very good materials and quality materials. Even if it is 1% plus 3% plus 2%, that still adds up to 6. Okay? So we have good materials and we want to continue with those. Okay? We want to share our similarities, celebrate our differences. So this is an example of one thing we can do. Here is a grammar exercise, a simple grammar exercise. Students get a variety of choices. So Mitya is walking down the road, and they have to decide what to choose. And sees a skunk. So this is one that tests basic grammar, right? He sees a skunk by the side of the road. The skunk says to him, "How are you today?" Mitya is shocked. Very simple exercise that enables the learners to choose the correct sentences. How could we change that to something that is more culturally inclusive? Any ideas? Nothing far-reaching. Simple way to change it. If you're a teacher, you're an overworked teacher in a classroom, there must be overworked teachers where you teach, right? A few, right? You have a tremendous amount of classes, you have to mark exams, you have to create lessons. What is a way that you can take a lesson like this from a textbook and make it culturally inclusive? Any ideas?
Maybe down the name.
What animal?
Okay, yeah. Change the name, change the animal, change the picture, change the place.
It can be with one, for example.
Yeah.
For a change.
Yeah, we can change almost anything. So we can talk with students in their classroom and we can have a lesson on, let's say, the Nenets tribe. We can have them research the Nenets tribe up north, right, near the Kara Sea. We can have a small research project. And then after that, we can say, okay, based on that lesson, can you replace Mitya? Can you replace walking down this road with a traditional house? Can you replace the skunk with an animal from their culture? Right? So the important thing is to try to preempt this with research, right? Encouraging research from different cultures, and then to change the lessons based upon those respective cultures. Any questions on this part? Did you want to say something? I'm sorry. Oh, okay.
No, just arrived.
Okay.
Please.
So
Welcome.
Inclusive here means inclusive, including cultures, yeah?
Yes.
Different cultures. Okay.
Yeah, including different cultures, yeah. Inclusive education is also used to talk about learners who have some disabilities who are included in mainstream classrooms. I gave that talk last month and we'll be giving it in a month and a half. So if you are interested in that particular aspect as well, please join me at the next talk. This one is specific about inclusivity with different cultures.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions so far? Okay. So what we want to get at here is what is known in the world of education as a culturally responsive instruction, right? Where we take cultural knowledge and prior experiences and we try to make learning more appropriate and more effective for them, right? We want to take the strengths of the students, right? And to recognize the importance of their beliefs and values within the instruction. In that, we have to be careful of what language we use. You saw the example of the casinos, for example. This is a very well-meaning lesson, but a Native American student who looks at that might say, oh, this is what everyone thinks of us. That all we do is we build traditional structures and have casinos. Right? So we have to be very careful what language we use. We want to make sure that we have very high standards across the board, meaning that sometimes in some books you see that the material developers try to make it more inclusive and more diverse, but they make the exercises easier for the culturally diverse component, right? So there might be something on Hispanic culture in the United States, and this one is multiple choice, but the rest of the book is short answers or long answers. And we may think, oh, what does it matter? This is just a different exercise. But in fact, the kids begin to internalize that. They begin to think, okay, when it becomes to an ethnic or a racial component, it's going to be something easier. Right? Just as we have the same standards for all students, we should have the same standards across the board for all the materials. We should have frequent exercises within the book for self-reflection. Make sure that the students have an adequate level of awareness. We don't only want to test whether they can get an answer correct or not, but we want them to reflect upon the process by which they came up with their answer. So this is very important, the reflective aspect. And if possible, depending on where you work, we can have a family component, meaning that you can have activities that bring in the family. Go to your family and ask 3 stories related to this topic, especially if you have schools with large ethnic populations, ethnic diversity. Right? Try and incorporate the family. Let them tell stories and the students to tell those stories to the class. And here's the better graphic, right? Have parental involvement if you can. You want to unlearn the stereotypes as well. Okay? So, this is pretty intuitive, but you really want to avoid any type of ridicule or stigmatization. You want to do that not only in the materials development, but when you form the groups, right, by which the students answer the tasks. Be careful not to stick all a certain type of learners in one group, even if they're friends. Sometimes kids are disruptive and we want to put them all with their friends, but just be mindful, right, that we want to mix the groups properly. And again, to reiterate, resources that are not superficial and stereotypical. This is for the Department of Indian Education in the United States. And we want material not only from my perspective, for example, but from the perspective of the diverse groups that we're writing about. I can read anything on Wikipedia. Right? I can research anything on the internet, but there's nothing like first-hand perspectives. There's nothing like learners researching things themselves, or ones from indigenous groups or ethnic groups, right? Going to their families and telling stories. This makes the learning more interesting. This makes them want to do better on the exams because they know, oh, there might be content from my family story in this exam. Any questions so far? And here is an example, right? 2 amazing history kids books from Native American perspectives. So these are stories in the United States, Custer's Last Stand, which was an unfortunate battle in the history of the United States between the US military and Native Americans. This gives the perspective from the Native American side. The story is always told from, or usually told from, the side of the military, what the military did. And this talks about a boy from the Sioux tribe and his upbringing. Again, it's not saying these people did this boy did this. It is from the child's perspective. And this is very important. We'll have this again. So, attention to detail. So, when we produce the materials, we want a diversity of photos. As we said, a careful in ordering. Right? We don't want the first few pages to always be from specific groups, and then the last page we have a cultural component. We want it to be normalized. We don't need to highlight the cultural component and the inclusive component as being separate in a little box. You see that very often. Right? You have a lesson on the present perfect, and then there's a little box that says cultural diversity, Native American tribe, and the present perfect, African American experience, and the present continuous. Right? We don't want that. We don't want to stigmatize these groups. We want to normalize, right, their traditions and culture within the material so the students don't notice any differences. And of course, we want to identify bias in the materials and find trustworthy materials. I just said you could find everything on Wikipedia, but Wikipedia is not the gospel. Right? There are mistakes on Wikipedia, and we want to be careful to corroborate and validate any stories that the students tell us before we put it into the materials. Because someone can have a very valid narrative that's a true experience from their parents or grandparents that can be very different than the dominant narrative. For example, talking about World War II, there could be a Jewish student whose family was protected and saved within Germany, and they were saved, and they're very thankful for all of this. This is not the dominant narrative of what happened to Jews during World War II. So we'd be very careful to include that, because students might think, oh, look, this is what happened. Right? The Germans saved all the Jews within their houses, when we know this is not correct. So we want to be careful that the materials reflect, right, a dominant narrative. Here's an example I want to show you of a Russian teacher, Eugene Koladin, who, from Yamalia English Language Teachers Association, who created a really brilliant online English language learning tool with a focus on the indigenous groups in his area, in Yamala Nenets. He called it the Back of Beyond. And he wanted this book to be an effective communication and cultural ambassador device, right, that's able to represent the region and the culture that these people come from. Why did he create this? Well, he found an almost complete absence of teaching materials on Russian regions, on indigenous groups within Russian regions. Right? And students had some difficulty to talk about their region in cross-cultural communicative situations. So he created this great learning tool. I encourage those of you who are educators or those of you who are interested to contact him. Right? He works in the school district in Yamalia, and to look at this and use it in your classroom if you can. And as part of this, Yamelka. And then there's a project that we're working on, and here's the pitch for my own project. Right? We're creating a project here supported by the US Embassy in Moscow, which is trying to promote cultural diversity and inclusivity by bringing together, right, English language learners from the United States and Russia to create materials that reflect themes from indigenous cultures in both countries. This project has a couple of aims. It aims at cross-cultural communication, but also local ownership. As you may have heard from that brief Facebook Live session, the learners themselves will create the materials. They'll go home, speak with their parents, speak with people in the community about specific themes related to weather and music, tribal leadership, right, creation myths, right? And they write paragraphs about that. They draw pictures, create artwork, and then at regional conferences, we create digital and printed publications. So the creative output is local, it has both Russian and US values, it's published, and there's an online platform. What themes, you may ask, do we use? Well, cosmological scenarios, creation myths. There's a lot of overlap between creation myths within groups in Russia, but also between groups in the United States and Russia. That's how the world was formed, according to indigenous cultures. Musical traditions. The impact of climate. Ethno-linguistics, what is that? Well, sometimes specific landmarks are given names, rivers and mountains, right? Ways of doing specific tasks depending on that specific culture. So the language adopts names for specific things based upon their culture. So there's a focus on that, and of tribal gatherings as well. So we have indigenous groups in Russia, members of indigenous populations, and the United States, and they put together this creative output. Okay? We want to publish phonics related to the different phonemes, how to pronounce words in the English language, and a lower intermediate textbook. And this is an online and print. So we have the content, we have the interaction between the two cultures, and we take a task-based approach to the exercises, implementing all these different points that I presented to you today. The 3 regional workshops take place in Yakutsk, Irkutsk, and Arkhangelsk, but we try and incorporate themes from learners within these dimensions, right? Russia is a huge country, I know from flying all the time, so this is, there are a lot of people in these areas. If you have any suggestions of specific groups or people you know within groups who would be interested in this project, or if you yourself are interested in this project, please feel free to contact me and approach me afterwards. Right? We'd be glad to have your feedback and expertise. After we publish everything, we'll have an online forum where people can communicate interculturally. Something as a peer-to-peer centered on Facebook. And that is the end of my presentation for today. What questions can I answer?
How can Moscow participate in this?
How can Moscow participate in this? Moscow in general.
Moscow region.
Moscow region. Well, if
St.
you,
Petersburg.
St. Petersburg, yeah. Well, there's a tremendous amount of diversity in Moscow, in St. Petersburg. There are people from all different groups in these cities, right? So you don't have to be near the Kara Sea to participate, right? Yeah. You can also help by validating stories, right? We can have some stories from the learners. If you're very knowledgeable in these specific groups, in their practices, you can help us out. Right? What else can I answer? Feel free to ask anything.
What about allocation? How improve this learning? How teach people? How teach student collocation between collocations words?
Co-allocations.
Yes, collocations.
Well, we'll have different points in here, different grammatical points, different syntactical points. They'll all be mixed in. So what will happen is the students will write stories. And then beforehand, we're going to decide what content we want structurally, like what grammatical points we want to teach. If we want to teach co-allocations, or we want to teach the perfect tense, or we're teaching conjunctions. And then we'll take those stories and we'll modify them, we'll integrate them into the particular exercises that we want. Please.
Yeah, my Russian wife, almost every day she tells me that there are 140 different ethnic groups, separate ethnic groups, which I find impossible to get my head around. Are you going to include them all, or just include them?
Yeah, I mean, we can include all the groups in Russia, and we can include all the groups in the United States, of course. I mean, we aim for inclusivity, but there's a limit to what we can do. The good part about this is, especially in digital form, if this project is successful, it can be continued in later years. We can have people say, oh, there are really interesting stories that are relevant from this group. Can you include them in another chapter? Right? And we may be able to do that.
Obviously, if you just did 1 page, 2 pages of each group.
Yeah, I mean, we'll do our best to include as much as possible, but realistically speaking, between 140 and 100 something in the United States, that would be just not in the scope of this project, time-wise. There's a limited time frame to put everything together.
So will we have it published, this program? Will it be published somewhere?
It will be published, yes.
And where we can find from American Center?
It will. Where will you find it? After it's published, we will have copies in the American Center, I'm sure. Yes, we will.
But if I'm not in Moscow, where can I?
Send an email to either the Moscow ELO at state.gov or to myself at akivaondeneve at gmail.com. Yeah, and we will, or to the American Center, and we will find a way to, to the best of our ability to.
And your lecture is filmed?
Excuse me?
And your lecture is filmed?
Probably. Yeah. Good. I think so.
So, and it also will have, the book will also have a electronic form, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Both.
Both. Yeah.
And will they be connected? Will they have the same
Same
material?
content.
The same content?
Same content. Yeah.
And I've got another question. Could students tell only their own stories, or they could interview others?
Yeah, the students, that's an excellent question, thank you. The students can interview others, and we encourage them to interview people within their community. So it doesn't have to be only their personal narrative, it could be anyone within the community. And that goes back to your question about Moscow and St. Petersburg. You know, a lot of people know people from different groups, and they could contact them and participate in this way.
And they write only stories or also poems?
There can be poems, stories, poems, and artwork as well. We want to include the learner's artwork. It doesn't have to be professional. It can't be a stick figure like I'm the worst artist probably in Russia. But anything that's halfway presentable, we want to include it. We want the learners to have as much input as possible.
Not working in drawings, painting?
can be anything that can be scanned or photographed. Anything that can be scanned or photographed, which is everything in the world, I believe. Do you have any other questions? Do you have specific projects of your own that you have questions about?
And what parts of America participate in this project, or they don't yet?
There'll be some in New York, some in Colorado, some in Wyoming, some in North Carolina. So these are different indigenous groups and Native Americans in these different parts of the United States. We won't, of course, get all 50 states or all Native American tribes. It's just impossible. There's at least 100, 150 at least. But we do the best we can.
This is all about only the English language learning or the Russian language learning as well for the Americans.
This is a book.
It's only about the English language. Yeah.
This is a textbook or a phonics material to teach the English language using these particular themes. So it's aimed at teaching the English language, but promoting these values, this diversity and inclusion, right, within the text.
Sorry, for development, what kind of skills in particular? You said you're using task-based approach,
Yeah.
right? But what kind of skills you're planning to use, to develop, sorry?
Well, the phonics is fairly straightforward to how to pronounce different ways for the learners to learn how to pronounce words in the English language, to form words and sentences. The lower intermediate will focus on lower speaking, reading, writing,
So all four skills.
grammar, the four main skills, but at a low intermediate level, so a B1 level, more or less. Anybody else? If there are no more questions, I thank you very much for coming to the presentation.
Thank you.
To do a quiz.
Ah, quiz.